The young soldiers sat in a circle around the old veteran. His name was Torek, and his body told the story of 100 battles. 2 of his 4 arms were metal now. His shell was covered in scars. His eyes had seen things that still visited him in his sleep. "You want to know about humans?" Torek said slowly. His voice was rough like stones grinding together. "Then I will tell you. But you must listen carefully. And you must pray that you never face them in battle." The recruits leaned forward. They had heard rumors about the species from the edge of the galaxy. Strange creatures with only 2 arms and soft skin. How dangerous could they be? Torek began his first story. The planet was called Keth 4. It was a mining world with red dust and thin air. The Velian army had sent 2,000 soldiers to take a small human outpost called Hollow Ridge. The mission was supposed to be simple. The humans had only 43 soldiers defending the base. Every computer model said they would surrender within hours. Commander Brel stood at the front of his army. He was proud and confident. He had never lost a battle. He sent a message to the human base. "You are surrounded. You cannot win. Surrender now, and we will spare your lives." The response came quickly. It was from a human sergeant named Tae-ho. The message contained only 4 words. "Come and take it." Brel laughed when he heard this. He thought the humans were stupid. He ordered his army to attack. That was his first mistake. The humans had prepared. They had dug trenches and built walls from mining equipment. They had placed traps everywhere. When the Velian soldiers charged, explosions tore through their ranks. Gunfire rained down from every direction. The first attack failed, with heavy losses. Brel was surprised but not worried. He had numbers on his side. He ordered a siege. He would starve the humans out. Their food would run out in 3 days. Then they would have no choice but to surrender. 3 days passed. The humans did not surrender. A week passed. Still no surrender. Inside the base, Sergeant Tae-ho organized his soldiers with calm precision. He divided them into shifts. When some slept, others watched. When ammunition ran low, they collected enemy weapons. A young soldier named Yuna worked the radio. She was the communications specialist. Other bases offered to send evacuation ships. She refused every time. "We are not leaving," she said. "This is our ground." The Velians attacked again and again. Each time, they lost more soldiers. The humans fought like demons. They used everything they had. When bullets ran out, they used mining lasers. When power cells died, they used explosives. When explosives ran out, they used rocks and metal pipes. Torek paused his story. The young recruits were staring at him with wide eyes. "I was there," Torek said quietly. "I was a young soldier in Brel's army. I saw what happened next." On the 19th day, Commander Brel ordered a final assault. Every remaining soldier would attack at once. The walls were broken. The defenses were weak. Surely the humans were finished. The Velian army broke through the outer walls. They poured into the base, expecting to find dead bodies and white flags. Instead, they found humans still fighting. Torek remembered a human female with blood covering her face. She had been shot 3 times. Her left arm hung useless at her side. But she was still firing her weapon with her right hand. Behind her, she was protecting a group of wounded soldiers. He remembered Sergeant Tae-ho standing in the center of the base. A piece of metal stuck out of his leg. He could barely stand, but he was shouting orders, directing his soldiers, refusing to fall. He remembered Yuna at her radio station. Her chair was soaked with blood. Bullets had torn through the walls around her. But she was still transmitting, still calling coordinates for the artillery strikes that kept coming from Allied forces far away. The fighting lasted for hours. When it finally ended, the Velian army had won the ground. But the cost was terrible. Torek looked at the young soldiers around him. "We started with 2,000 soldiers. When the battle ended, we had lost 847. The humans lost 26. 17 of them survived. He let that number sink in. 43 humans killed 847 of us, and 17 of them lived to tell about it. One of the young recruits spoke up. But how? Our armor is stronger. Our weapons are better. We had so many more soldiers. Torek nodded slowly. Yes, we had every advantage, but we did not have what they had. He tapped his chest where a heart would be. Humans do not calculate odds the way we do. When our computers tell us we cannot win, we retreat. We survive to fight another day. This is logical. This is smart. He leaned forward, and his voice dropped to a whisper. Humans do not care about logic. They do not care about odds. When their computers tell them they cannot win, they simply decide that the computers are wrong. They refuse to lose. They refuse to die. They keep fighting until their bodies break. And even then, they keep fighting. Torek stood up slowly, his metal arms clicking. Commander Brell called it a glitch in our tactical software. He said our computers made an error. He was wrong. There was no error. The computers simply could not calculate something that makes no sense. They could not predict soldiers who would rather die than surrender. He looked at each young recruit in turn. That was my first lesson about humans. When they decide to hold ground, they hold it. When they decide to fight, they fight until the end. Not the end of the battle, the end of themselves. The recruits were silent. Outside, stars drifted past the ship's windows. Somewhere out there, humans were living, working, fighting. That was only the first story, Torek said. Would you like to hear another? The young soldiers shifted nervously as Torek settled back into his seat. The first story had shaken them. But the old veteran was not finished. The next story is different, Torek said. At Hollow Ridge, the humans fought in daylight. They stood together as a group. That was terrifying enough. But what happens when a human is alone? What happens when a human fights in the dark? Ath. He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering. This story takes place on a world called Maros 3. It was a planet of caves and tunnels. The Velian army controlled the surface, but we needed the tunnels. Deep underground, there were power stations that could fuel our entire fleet. We sent 300 soldiers to clear the tunnels and take the stations. It should have been easy. Torek opened his eyes. It was not easy. The tunnel network under Maros 3 stretched for hundreds of kilometers. It was dark and cold. The air smelled like metal and old water. Lieutenant Goss led the Velian clearance team. He was experienced and careful. He sent scouts ahead. He moved slowly. He checked every corner. For the first 2 days, they found nothing but empty tunnels and abandoned equipment. Then, they found the first body. It was a Velian scout. He had been killed silently. No gunfire. No explosion. Just a knife in the dark. His radio was missing. His weapon was gone. Goss ordered his soldiers to stay in groups. No one walks alone. No one leaves the main tunnel without permission. They continued forward. The next day, 3 more soldiers disappeared. They had been at the back of the group. One moment, they were there. The next moment, they were gone. The team found them 2 hours later. They had been killed quickly and quietly. Their equipment was taken. Fear began to spread through the Velian soldiers. Who was doing this? How many enemies were hiding in the dark? The answer was one. Just one. His name was Han Su. He was a corporal and a demolitions expert. His squad had been killed in the first days of fighting on the surface. He had escaped into the tunnels alone. He had no way to reach the surface. He had no way to call for help. Most soldiers would have hidden and waited for rescue. Han Su did not hide. He decided to fight. He knew the tunnels better than the Velians. He had studied the maps. He knew where to hide. He knew where sound carried and where it did not. He learned to move without making noise. He learned to kill without being seen. In the third week, the Velians started hearing things. Footsteps that led nowhere. Whispers in the dark. Strange sounds that echoed through the stone. Sometimes they found messages carved into the walls. Simple words in the human language. I see you. Run. You are next. Lieutenant Goss sent teams to hunt the ghost. The teams never came back whole. Some lost soldiers in the dark. Some returned with wounded men screaming about shadows that moved. Some did not return at all. Han Su used everything he could find. He built traps from mining equipment. He created explosions that collapsed tunnels at perfect moments. He stole Velian weapons and used them against their owners. When he ran out of bullets, he used his knife. When his knife broke, he made a new one from metal scraps. But the most dangerous weapon he used was fear. Han Su learned to mimic Velian distress calls. He would cry for help in the darkness. And when soldiers came running, they found only death. He left Velian equipment in empty rooms, waiting for someone to pick it up and trigger the trap. He let some soldiers live just long enough to run back to their friends and spread terror. By the 6th week, the Velian team was broken. They had lost 94 soldiers to 1 human. 1. Lieutenant Goss had stopped sleeping. He heard sounds everywhere. A contention every point. And his pawn sleeping. He saw movement in every shadow. His soldiers refused to leave the main chamber. Then the rescue came. A human team broke through from the surface. They had been fighting for weeks to reach the tunnels. Leading them was an engineer named Bo-Ra. She expected to find a dead man. Instead, she found Han Su waiting for her with a smile on his face. He was thin and pale. His uniform was torn. His body was covered in small wounds, but his eyes were bright and sharp. In his hands, he held a map. It showed every tunnel, every Velian position, every weakness in their defense. I was preparing for you, he said. I was getting ready for the attack. I just needed more time. Bo-Ra stared at him. You have been alone down here for 6 weeks, fighting 300 soldiers. And you were planning an attack? Han Su nodded. They thought they were hunting me, but I was hunting them. Torek stopped speaking. The young recruits were barely breathing. Lieutenant Goss survived that mission, Torek said quietly. But he never served again. He cannot sleep without lights. He cannot enter dark rooms. He still wakes up screaming about footsteps that follow him. One recruit raised a shaking hand. How did one human do so much damage? We have night vision. We have heat sensors. We have technology that should make darkness meaningless. Torek laughed. But there was no humor in it. Yes, we have technology. But technology is not enough. Do you know why? He leaned forward. Because humans are not afraid of the dark. They grew up on a world with long nights. They lived in caves before they built cities. Darkness is not their enemy. It is their home. He tapped his scarred shell with a metal finger. We use technology to see in the dark. Humans, they become the dark. They become the thing that hides in shadows. They become the sound that you cannot find. They become the fear that eats at your mind until you cannot think straight. Torek stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the stars burned cold and distant. Han Su received many medals for what he did. The humans called him a hero. But I think even they did not fully understand what he had become down there in the tunnels. He turned back to the young soldiers. He became something that every Velian soldier fears. Something that we have no word for. The humans have a word for it. They call it a nightmare. The recruits sat in silence. The ship hummed around them. Somewhere in the walls, a pipe made a soft sound. Every recruit turned to look. Torek smiled grimly. And that, young ones, is how quickly fear takes hold. One human. Alone. In the dark. Remember that. Torek let the silence grow. The young recruits were nervous now. They kept looking at the shadows in the corners of the room. Good. They were learning. The next story is about something different, Torek said. Not endurance, not fear. This story is about what happens when you threaten something that humans love. He sat down heavily, his old joints clicking. Station Vega 1-2 was a trading hub. 40,000 people lived there. Merchants, families, children. It was a peaceful place, far from the war. Many species lived together in harmony. No one expected violence. Torek's voice grew cold. Then the Black Fang Syndicate came. The Black Fang were mercenaries. They had no loyalty to any government. They robbed, kidnapped, and killed for money. Their leader was called Krath. He was cruel and clever. He had raided dozens of stations and never failed. He came to Vega 1-2 with 600 fighters and a simple plan. Take hostages, demand ransom, leave rich. The attack came without warning. The Black Fang disabled the station's defenses in minutes. They jammed communications. They blocked the docking ports. Then they boarded. The station's security force was small. 31 officers led by a human woman named Unbi. She was in her 40s. She had 2 children of her own, living on the station. When the alarm sounded, she gathered her team and made a decision. The civilians must reach the safe rooms, she said. We will hold the enemy back, whatever it takes. Her second in command was a man named Dae Sung. He was a former soldier. He had seen war before. He knew what was coming. His hands shook sometimes from old memories, but when Yunbi gave the order, his hands became steady. What about Sector 7? He asked. His voice was tight. Sector 7 was where the station's nursery and school complex was located. 312 children. Some were human. Some were Velian. Some were other species. All of them were too young to fight. Too young to run fast. Too young to protect themselves. Yunbi looked at her map. The Black Fang were spreading through the station quickly. They would reach Sector 7 in 20 minutes. We go there, she said. All of us. The security team ran through the station. They passed, screaming civilians and burning corridors. They reached Sector 7, just as the first Black Fang scouts appeared. What happened next lasted 53 minutes. The survivors would call it the Red Hour. Yunbi and her 30 officers faced 200 mercenaries in the corridors outside the school. The humans did not retreat. They did not negotiate. They did not hesitate. The fighting was close and brutal. In the narrow hallways, guns fired so close that soldiers burned from the heat. Knives and fists did as much work as bullets. The floor became slick with blood. Dae Sung took a blade through his chest in the first 10 minutes. The blade missed his heart by 2 centimeters. He pulled it out and kept fighting. He would later say that he did not feel the pain. He only felt rage. Yunbi ran out of ammunition after 30 minutes. A Black Fang fighter charged at her, and she killed him with a fire extinguisher. She swung it like a club, until it broke. Then she picked up his weapon and kept shooting. One by one, the human officers fell. But for each human that fell, 10 mercenaries died. The Black Fang had never seen anything like it. These were not soldiers. These were not trained warriors. These were security guards, office workers with badges. And they fought like animals protecting their young, because that is exactly what they were, behind the human line. The children huddled in the schoolrooms. Teachers held them close. Some children cried. Some were silent, with fear. They could hear the fighting outside. They could hear the screams and the gunfire. And they could hear the humans. Not screaming in fear, screaming in fury. A young Velian child asked her teacher, "Will the monsters get us?" The teacher looked at the door. Behind it, a human security guard was fighting 3 enemies at once. He was wounded in 5 places. He was still standing. Still fighting. "No," the teacher said. "The monsters will not get us. The humans will not let them." At the 53-minute mark, Reinforcements arrived. Ships from a nearby military base had received a distress signal before communications were jammed. They broke through the Black Fang fleet and boarded the station. When they reached Sector 7, they found a scene of horror and heroism. 187 Black Fang mercenaries were dead. The corridor walls were painted red. The floor was covered with bodies. And standing among them, still fighting, were the surviving humans. 9 human officers had died. 22 were wounded, some badly. But every single one of the 312 children was alive. Not one had been touched. Torek paused. His voice became soft. I spoke to a human doctor after I heard this story. I asked her why her people fought so hard for children that were not even their own. Many of those children were Velian. Some were species that humans had never even met before. Why risk everything for strangers? The recruits waited. She looked at me like I had asked a stupid question. She said, "Because they are children." That was all. As if nothing more needed to be said. Torek shook his head slowly, and I realized something in that moment. To humans, that is enough. A child is a child. It does not matter what species. It does not matter whose child. A child must be protected. Always. At any cost. He looked at the young soldiers with something that might have been fear. Krath, the Black Fang leader, escaped that day. But he never raided another station with humans on it. Never. When his lieutenants asked why, he said one sentence that spread across the galaxy. Torek spoke the words slowly, letting each one land. He said, "Threaten their children, and they stop being people. They become something else. Something that does not stop until you are dead." The old veteran stood and walked to the door. Remember that, young ones. If you ever face humans in battle, do not touch their families. Do not threaten their children. Do not harm the weak and small. Because if you do, you will discover what humans truly are. He looked back at them. And you will not survive the lesson. The ship's lights dimmed as the night cycle began. But the young recruits did not want to sleep. They sat around Torek, waiting for the next story. The old soldier understood. Once you started learning about humans, you could not stop. This next story is about sacrifice, Torek said. True sacrifice. The kind that makes no sense to species like us. The kind that humans do without thinking. He closed his eyes, and his voice grew heavy with memory. I was there for this one. I saw it with my own eyes. The Battle of Orith Plains. The day I learned what human loyalty really means. The war had reached a critical point. The coalition army, which included both Velians and humans, was retreating from a massive enemy offensive. They needed to reach a mountain pass to escape. If the enemy caught them in the open plains, they would all die. But there was a problem. The enemy was too fast. They would reach the pass first and block the escape. The coalition needed time. 4 hours. Just 4 hours to get their wounded soldiers, their supply trains, and their vehicles through the mountains. The generals looked at their maps. There was only one solution. Someone had to stay behind and hold the pass entrance. Someone had to slow down the enemy, while the rest of the army escaped. They all knew what this meant. Whoever stayed would not survive. A human captain stood up. Her name was G1. She led a company called the Broken Hand, named for their emblem of a shattered fist. They were 112 soldiers. They had fought in every major battle of the war. They were tired and wounded, and they volunteered to stay. We will hold the pass, G1 said. Her voice was calm. Get our people to safety. We will give you time. The coalition general argued with her. He offered to find another solution, but G1 shook her head. There is no other solution. You know this. I know this. Stop wasting time and start moving. The army began its retreat. The Broken Hand took their position at the entrance to the pass. They dug trenches. They set up barriers. They placed explosives in the rocks above. They prepared to die. Ji-won gathered her soldiers. Among them was a medic named Su-min. He had saved more lives in this war than anyone could count. He could have left with the wounded. He chose to stay. There was also a young private named Hyun-ki. He was only 17 years old, the youngest soldier in the company. Ji-won ordered him to leave. "No," Hyun-ki said. His voice did not shake. "I am Broken Hand. I stay with my company." Ji-won looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. "Write your letter," she said. "Make it a good one." Hyun-ki sat down and wrote a letter to his mother. When he was finished, he folded it carefully and gave it to a messenger heading to the rear. Then he picked up his rifle and joined his brothers and sisters on the line. The enemy came 2 hours later. 6,000 soldiers against 112. Torek's voice grew rough. "I was with the enemy army. We did not know the humans had stayed behind. We expected to catch the coalition at the pass and destroy them. Instead, we found the Broken Hand, waiting for us." The first attack came in waves. Hundreds of soldiers rushed toward the human position. The Broken Hand held their fire until the enemy was close. Then, they opened up with everything they had. The first wave broke. The second wave broke. The third wave got closer before falling back. Bodies piled up in front of the human trenches. But still, the enemy kept coming. Hours passed. The humans ran low on ammunition. They used enemy weapons taken from the dead. They collapsed cliff faces with explosives. When one position fell, they retreated to another and kept fighting. Su-min worked without rest. He operated on wounded soldiers in a shallow cave behind the lines. Enemy fire hit the rocks around him. He did not stop. He saved 31 soldiers that day, pulling bullets from their bodies and stitching their wounds while the battle raged outside. At the 8-hour mark, the enemy broke through the main line. They thought victory was close. They were wrong. Ji-won called for artillery fire on her own position. The shells came down like rain, killing enemy and human alike. When the smoke cleared, the surviving Broken Hand soldiers emerged from their bunkers and started fighting again. Young Hyun-ki saw an enemy armor column approaching from the east. They would roll over the human position in minutes. He looked at the fuel reserves the Broken Hand had been protecting. Then, he made his choice. He ran to the fuel tanks. He shot the first enemy soldier who tried to stop him. Then he detonated the reserves. The explosion destroyed the entire armor column. It killed 40 enemy soldiers. And it killed Hyun-ki. He was 17 years old. Torek stopped speaking. His metal hands were shaking. "I was part of the force that tried to take the pass. We fought for 11 hours. 11 hours against 112 humans. When relief forces finally broke through to rescue them, we had lost over 2,000 soldiers." He looked at the young recruits. "Do you know how many Broken Hand soldiers survived?" 23. All of them wounded. All of them still holding their weapons. All of them still fighting. And, one recruit asked quietly, "What happened to Captain Ji-won?" "She was shot 7 times during the battle. When the rescue ships landed, she was lying on a stretcher, but she was still giving orders. She refused to leave until every survivor was loaded first." Torek stood and walked to the window. "I remember watching them carry out the survivors. I remember seeing that young private, Hyun-ki's friend. He was barely alive. He asked his captain if they had held long enough, if the army had escaped." The old soldier's voice broke. She told him yes. They had held long enough. The army was safe. He smiled at her. And then he closed his eyes. He died before they reached the medical ship. He died, smiling. Torek turned back to the recruits. His eyes were wet. "I have fought many battles. I have seen many soldiers die. But I have never understood what I saw that day. Why would they stay? Why would they die for people who were already running away? Why would a 17-year-old boy smile as he died?" He shook his head slowly. "Humans call it loyalty. They call it duty. They call it love for their brothers and sisters in arms. But I do not think we have a word for what I saw that day. I only know that when I die, I hope I die half as bravely as those humans did. The recruits sat in silence. Outside the window, the stars burned on, cold and endless. Somewhere out there, the graves of the broken hand lay in the shadow of a mountain pass. And somewhere out there, humans were still fighting, still dying, still refusing to abandon each other. The night cycle was almost over. The young recruits had not slept. They could not sleep. Torik's stories had changed something inside them. The old veteran knew this. He had seen it happen before. One more story, Torik said. The last lesson about humans. Perhaps the most important one. He settled into his chair. His voice became quiet, careful. This story takes place 10 years after the border wars ended. Peace had been declared. The galaxy was healing. Old enemies became new friends. Everyone wanted to forget the past and move forward. Torik paused. Everyone except the humans. During the war, there had been many terrible events, but one stood out above the rest. The massacre of Green Dawn. A Velian fleet admiral named Chorus had captured 3,000 human soldiers after a battle. They had surrendered according to the rules of war. They expected to be treated as prisoners. They expected to survive. Chorus had other plans. He ordered all 3,000 prisoners executed. No trial. No mercy. He had them lined up in the desert and shot them, one by one. It took 6 hours. Chorus watched the whole thing. When the war ended, human governments demanded justice. They brought evidence to the galactic courts. They presented witnesses. They showed video recordings of the massacre. The courts ruled they had no jurisdiction. The case was closed. The humans accepted this decision publicly. They signed peace treaties. They shook hands with former enemies. They spoke about healing and forgiveness. But they did not forget. A retired colonel named Narration had lost her entire battalion at Green Dawn. 237 soldiers under her command. She had survived only because she was in a hospital when the surrender happened. For 10 years, she carried their names with her. She remembered every face, every voice, every laugh, and every fear. And for 10 years, she hunted. Narration built a network of human veterans. They worked in silence. They gathered information. They tracked every Velian officer who had been present at the massacre. One by one, those officers faced consequences. Some were arrested when evidence reached courts that did have jurisdiction. Some lost their positions when their crimes became public. Some simply disappeared. Chorus was the last. He had changed his name after the war. He had hidden his wealth in secret accounts. He had moved to a resort world, far from Velian space. He thought he was safe. He thought the humans had given up. He was wrong. Naration's nephew, Wu Jin, was an intelligence operative. He had spent 3 years tracking Chorus. He found the false name. He found the secret accounts. He found the beautiful house on the resort world where Chorus lived in comfort, surrounded by servants and luxury. Narration traveled to that world. She was old now. Her hair was gray. Her body moved slowly, but her eyes were sharp, and her mind was clear. She did not come to kill Chorus. That would have been too easy. That would have been mercy. Instead, she brought evidence. Recordings from the massacre, testimony from survivors, financial documents showing how Chorus had profited from the war. She gave all of it to journalists. She released it to the galactic network. She made sure that everyone in the galaxy knew who Chorus really was. Within days, Chorus was the most hated creature in known space. His servants abandoned him. His neighbors refused to look at him. His bank accounts were frozen. As investigators found illegal transactions, former allies denied ever knowing him. He was ruined, completely, permanently. Narration visited him one last time. She walked into his empty mansion and found him sitting alone in a dark room. He looked up at her, with fear in his eyes. "Why?" he asked. His voice was weak and broken. "Why did you not just kill me? It would have been faster." "Kinder." Nare looked at him for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was calm. "Because you killed my soldiers while they were helpless. You gave them no chance, no dignity, no hope." She took a step closer. "Now you have no dignity, no hope. And every day you wake up, you will remember what you did. You will see their faces. You will know that the galaxy despises you. You will live with that knowledge until you die." She turned to leave. At the door, she stopped. "And you will spend every remaining day knowing that we found you. After 10 years. After all your hiding. We found you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "You will never stop wondering if we are coming back." She walked out and never looked at him again. Chorus lived for 3 more years. He never left his mansion. He never spoke to anyone. He died alone, surrounded by empty rooms and old ghosts. Torek finished his story. The young recruits were very quiet. "This is the final lesson about humans," the old veteran said. "Other species fight wars and then move on. We forget. We heal. We find new concerns and new conflicts. We let the past become the past." He shook his head slowly. "Humans do not move on. They carry their dead with them like stones in their hearts. They remember every name, every face, every wrong that was done to them, and they will chase you across time and space to make things right." One recruit spoke up. But the courts said there was no case. The law was on Chorus's side. Torek laughed quietly. Yes, the law was on his side. But humans do not always follow the law. They follow something older, something deeper. They call it justice, or sometimes they call it revenge. To them, there is not much difference. He stood and stretched his old body. Humans are not like us. We fight for territory, for resources, for power. Humans fight for each other. They fight for memory. They fight because they cannot bear to let the dead go unavenged. Torek walked to the door. Outside, the ship's lights were brightening as the day cycle began. Somewhere ahead, their destination waited. "Are we at war with humans now?" one young recruit asked nervously. Torek turned back with something that might have been a smile. "No, young one. The humans are our allies now. We fought beside them in the later wars. We bled together. We died together. They have forgiven us for the past." He paused. "And that is why I sleep well for the first time in 40 cycles." He looked at each recruit in turn, making sure they understood. Be grateful that they are on our side. Be grateful that they call us friends. And never, ever, give them a reason to change their minds. He stepped through the door and stopped one last time. Because if you do, they will not forget. They will not forgive. And one day, when you think you are safe, when you think the past is buried and gone, you will look up and see a human standing in your doorway. The door closed behind him. The recruits sat in silence for a long time. The stars drifted past the windows. Somewhere out there, humans were living their lives. Working, building, loving their families, and remembering. Always remembering.